Van kleins af is plantasies vir my 'n sprokieswêreld.
Since I was a young boy, plantations have always been like a fairy tale world to me. I found it so mesmerizing that I didn't want to become anything other than a forester. But then I got older and realized that the world is not a fairy tale, and that monoculture, like plantations, is no laughing matter. And then, for years thereafter, forestry was the enemy in my eyes. People ruining the environment. This should all be grasslands, but instead there are trees everywhere. Exotic pine trees, heaps of pine needles. Surely it shouldn't be this way. But then I got even older, and I'm starting to realize that there's no point in getting angry at the timber companies when they are simply satisfying a market that you and I have created. Our lifestyle is the market, and they are simply the suppliers. So now the question stands, if they are a necessary evil that we cannot get rid of, can they do something to lighten the massive footprint they have on the world?
Het op die wêreld 'n klein bietjie ligter te maak.
Last year, I went on a trip to the KZN Midlands to have a look at the Sappi forestry footprint. It is a beautiful green world, filled with rare and endangered species.
Nou gaan ons kyk wat die karkloof blou skoenlapper bly.
It is the wrong time of the year for this critically endangered butterfly species, but Sappi's environmental chief, David Everard, is keen to show me one of the little patches of grassland where these critters still occur. It is a healthy and untouched piece of nature, right in the middle of the plantations, and the veld is teeming with all sorts of flowering grasses and other wildflowers, and of course all the biodiversity that goes with it.
This site was known and identified, I think, in the 1950s as being an important site for the cockleaf blue butterfly. And so Sappi, I don't think Sappi owned the land then, to be honest. I think it was another forestry company, but they did not plant it, and it's been kept open since then.
It is certainly a good thing that they kept the pines out of here, because this is one of only 3 remaining habitats of the karkloof blue. And even here in the grasslands, one is constantly aware of the plantations. There are trees everywhere. One of the stories I've heard many times about plantations is that they look beautiful, but that they are in fact nothing more than green deserts. The sunlight cannot come through the trees, and nothing grows underneath them. You may see some grass on the edges, but if you look deeper, there is nothing. The problem, I was told, is that the pine needles create a thick carpet, and when the trees are harvested, the ground is barren and nothing will ever grow there again. But is this true?
The actual stand of trees is quite sterile. I mean, it's a very productive spot where it is a monoculture, like any other form of agriculture, a mealie field or a wheat field. So there's not a lot of other biodiversity there, other than the things, the earthworms, the animals that are, the insects that live on the forest floor, they all come in and all the processes are happening. So you get decomposition of the litter fall. Processes are happening in the stand of trees, and as soon as you cut the tree down, you leave that open area for a month or two, and the weeds and the plants are coming up like hairs on a dog's back.
Dave eagerly takes us to a wetland where they are no longer planting pines.
We've withdrawn from these areas and trying to rehabilitate these wetlands so that they can perform the ecological and environmental services that wetlands do in the landscape.
Just
Clean
amazing.
Water and that sort of thing.
It's amazing to see how it's come back, which over what sort of time period are we talking here?
About 10, 12 years that they were cleared.
So in the old days, it was actually considered fine to plant in wetlands, and
pre-1972, that was the kind of thing that people did.
general practice.
General practice. Wetlands. In fact, a lot of wetlands were areas, were useless areas to farmers. They were areas that had mosquitoes, so farmers would drain them, plantation people, the foresters would plant them up, you'd get good growth. In fact, if you still look at traditional societies, this is where you do your agriculture because it's productive areas.
Then we're on our way again, this time to the western side of the Karkloof Nature Reserve.
So dis deel van Karkloof se waarde is juist die inheemse woud.
Ja. Hierdie Karkloof se woud is die grootste inheemse woud in KZN. Ek dink Naismith Forest is groter as hierdie, maar is een van die grootste patches in die land. So it's baie.
And this belongs to SAPI.
This piece here.
Oh, so part of Karkloof. Okay.
Yeah, this piece of forest we're going into is Sappy's, but it's joined to the Karkloof Nature Reserve, and in fact a whole lot of private landowners own some of Karkloof forest, but there is some that is owned also by the state and KZN Wildlife.
The forest is a lush refuge for many and is home to a breeding pair of crowned eagle who reside in the tallest tree in the forest, a eucalyptus. This patch of exotic trees has escaped forced removal because of this nest, but eucalyptus saplings are removed from the rest of the forest to maintain its indigenous integrity. And then we see the eagle, a magnificent sight. On day 2 of our trip to the Midlands, we travel to the other side of Howick, to the Mist Belt grasslands. This area is not just good for plantations and various other agricultural activities, but is also home to one of our most endangered bird species here in South Africa, the blue swallow. Of course, there are many other rare species that call the Mist Belt home, and this morning we are greeted by the resident Denham's bustard.
It's really nice to see that they're here, and they're always here. One of the special attributes of this site.
The area is not open to the public, and because it is literally surrounded by plantations, it is truly a piece of untouched wilderness.
Dave, so I believe this is quite a special spot.
This is our Rulton Dam spot. It's one of our important conservation areas, and it's really important because it's Ngongoni veld, which is a threatened veld type, the Mist Belt grassland from KZN. So this whole area as a veld type is threatened, but it also contains the critically endangered blue swallows, which breed up on the slopes up there in aardvark holes, and aardvark are also quite rare species. So it contains a good range of threatened species. In fact, I would guess that this is probably one of the most valuable grassland patches in the whole of KwaZulu-Natal.
As with the other natural areas, this area is carefully managed by SAPI to give all the biodiversity the best possible chance for survival.
Johannes, ons uitkyk vir blou swalkies, dan kyk ons oor die grasveld hoe hulle vlieg. So hulle vliegpatroon, die blou swalkies, soos daar kan ons sien, gaan laag oor die veld. Hulle is nie geneig om te hoog te vlieg nie. En dan natuurlik kyk ons maar vir die kleur en die lang stertvere en sulke dinge.
We are lucky to see them because there's really only one breeding pair here.
There's a pair that always breed here, and it's been the most successful breeding site, I think, in South Africa. So every year they fledge at least 2 or 3 broods of chicks, and we always see them here, one pair that breeds. Yeah, sometimes you see the young, so you can see up to 4 or 5 here at the end of the season.
There are only an estimated 30 blue swallow breeding pairs left in the country, so the conservation of this land is a priority.
And I think one of the problems is when you get a week of rain here and the mist sits over here, they have to move elsewhere to.
So do they have somewhere else to move around here?
Well, they must do, because they always come back and they always seem to survive in this spot. This patch is just short of 120 hectares, I think exactly 119 hectares, and it's good. As you can see, it would be wonderful forestry area, so we've done well to keep the foresters' hands off it. But it, as I say, it is now kept aside as one of our important conservation value areas, and we hope to
put this site up for stewardship.
119 hectares doesn't sound like a lot if you look at all the plantations in the area. But think of this. Over a 10-year period, you can harvest about 800,000 rands timber per hectare. So we're talking here of about 80 million rand. A lot of money for 2 little birds. Luckily, 4 now. The Rulton Dam site has no formal protection status, and the conservation thereof is entirely up to SAPI management. And it's with a forestry footprint in mind that SAPI is making the decision to conserve and manage these natural areas.
If you've got timber coming into a landscape, it's planted into grassland landscapes in this country. They were the wet grassland landscapes. And so you're converting that landscape from a grass-dominated landscape to a landscape dominated by trees.
By keeping some areas unplanted, SAPI recognizes the importance of the ecological value of wetlands and grasslands.
Grasslands are absolutely essential for as water producers. Grassland protects the soil, and if you're sitting with a situation where you get rid of your grasslands, you get into a much more erosive situation, and trees use up the water, and you end up with streams dying off. One of the biggest impacts of trees is stream flow reduction. And so grasslands aren't just a uniform landscape covered with grass, but they're seeps and bogs and many different wetland types, all which get degraded and disappear under trees. And those wetland types are how you recharge the groundwater and eventually recharge the streams, which give our country the water. And very important is local use of water. So you get rid of these grasslands, and especially these upper catchment areas, the water runs out for the communities downstream.
The value of natural areas and intact wetlands and grasslands is foremost in the minds of SAPI management, and the conservation of these areas is a priority.
We know that about 135,000 hectares is permanently unplanted, so it's land that is not used for forestry, which is 35% of the land. And that land, well, 5% of that land is for infrastructure, offices and roadways and maybe power line servitudes, but the other 30% is conservation land, really. So, yeah, a big responsibility, and there is a lot of land that we do manage for conservation. And when we say for conservation, we try to keep it in as healthy condition as possible and in as natural habitat as possible. So it would support the plants and animals that would naturally be in that area.
On day 4 of our visit, we take the road to Claremont Mountain, the crown jewel of SAPI's protected areas. The road twists past rows of pines, and the plan for the day is to climb the mountain. This mountain is SAPI's first official reserve, thanks to the stewardship program that formalizes private conservation initiatives.
Okay, stewardship is driven from a national level. It's the primary mechanism for protected areas expansion in South Africa, and it's being run now by all the provinces in the country.
In other words, a piece of private land can be proclaimed as a nature reserve and be protected by law.
It's a very exciting way of creating these partnerships between the landowners and the conservation agencies, because most of our protected area systems are not properly representative of the biodiversity in the various provinces. And if you think about a place like the Kruger Park, it represents certain vegetation types very well, whereas if you think about the grassland biome which we're in, only something like 2% of the grassland biome is protected. So the stewardship program enables us to work with landowners to formally protect more areas and make sure that they're secured for conservation.
Claremont Mountain lies in the middle of the KZN Midlands, and it's a steep footpath to the top. A bulbous plant that seems to have been hacked by a panga catches our eyes.
Because there's a lot of this on the mountain, this scilla, and we know that a number of the scilla species are very sought after as medicinal plants, so I'm not exactly sure what they use them for, but they obviously collected this.
My question is, why walk all this way to get these things. Why don't they just get them there where they live? Or have they gone there?
They've obviously gone there. And these might not grow down in lower altitudes. There are a lot up, and when we climb up onto the cliffs here, you will see a lot of them in flower. Beautiful blue flowers.
But the biggest threat to these little flowers is not necessarily humans.
They're also vulnerable to cattle, you know, trampling.
heavy,
and, it's not just collecting. If you get in a heavy grazed area, you don't see those anymore. Okay. And they've almost disappeared completely from any communal areas. Anywhere within a kilometre of a village, you don't find this plant, except in rocky outcrops sometimes, you know.
And this is why the formal protection of a place like this is of great importance.
When it's a nature reserve, we'd have the help of the KZN wildlife community people, and hopefully through education and through talking to the people we can sort of convince them that nature conservation is important.
Higher up, more evidence that cattle can cause great damage to grasslands.
Well, what's happened here is when the forester pushed the road, they obviously gave access through the plantation. And I know the communities push small herds of cattle, but this is a cattle path up onto the mountain. We don't often see the cattle up here, but I suppose in times of drought or when there's pressure on grazing elsewhere, they push their cattle through.
And this has caused this whole furrow?
This caused this whole furrow. Wow. Not only the cattle, obviously the water that runs in the cattle path.
Well, from now on it will just escalate. I mean, every time there's water, it's going to run down here and it's going to get bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
Being a nature reserve now, will that actually stop cattle coming in here, or will you fence it? I mean, what's the plan?
I don't think we'll be able to fence it. But I mean, hopefully we can stop cattle getting in here. And then, you know, rehabilitating these areas, putting barriers up and getting the water out of this to spill over the sides. That's the only way. And but being a nature reserve, at least now we can spend a bit of money on it and you know, do it for a good reason and get help as well from nature.
But what you're
nature
saying
departments.
is that this.
Once at the top, Stefan and I go to look for a suitable spot to rig one of his observation cameras.
Dit lyk na 'n goeie plek hierdie. Ons het 4 kameras gehad ons uitgeplaas het. En ongelukkig, ek dink die ouens hou nogal van die kameras, so hulle dra die goed weg. Maar ons het nou nog bestel.
En dan okay goed, hier is ons nou bo op 'n natuurreservaat in die oopte weer om nou opstel, maar ek neem aan julle sal nou sekerlik daarom kyk wat gaan in die plantasies ook aan.
Het gaan interessant wees om te sien wat hier ook rondloop, maar ons wil spesifiek kyk omdat daar so 'n stigma rondom plantasies is en dit gesien word as steriele plekke en weer na verwys word as groen woestyne en al sulke dinge. Maar bro, ons gesels gereeld met ons bosbouers wat woon en werk op die plantasies en hulle sien gereeld wild en hulle volgens hulle loop die plek oor van wild. So vir die kameras is vir ons 'n goeie metode om te kyk wat daar is. Ons het nou al meer as 18 verskillende soorte spesies opgetel. En dit sluit dinge in soos duikers, rietbokke, bosbokke, bosvarke, vlakvarke. Maar dan die meer interessante of dalk meer skaarser spesies is dinge soos 'n ratel, tierboskatte, rooi katte en sulke dinge. So dit raak baie interessant.
It would seem that SAPI is as serious about grassland management as they are about forestry. And it is not always easy because what is good for the one may harm the other, like fire for instance. As part of the management plan, grasslands are burned, but it is important to make sure the plantations are not affected. So SAPI and other foresters support the local fire station.
Watch 3. It's the latest when it comes to fire detection, computerized fire detection.
And with these cameras, they can monitor the area 24/7 and know exactly when what is being
Now I've
burned.
informed this guy here that you've got a neighbor burning on the border of F30 is burning some grass. And so he's aware of the fire and I'm aware of it. It's a controlled burn.
SAPI is one of South Africa's largest private landowners, if not the biggest, and it is encouraging to see that they are about much more than simply forestry. Every piece of grassland conserved means the survival of a unique biodiversity and a step in the right direction.
I think things are slowly changing to understanding that sustainability, while you're making money, is good for everybody. And it's good for the timber company to make sure that their soils are maintained, that the plantations are healthy as it is for people using those products. I'd say it's more an understanding of the imperative to be sustainable rather than being more conservation minded. We need to look at things holistically.